Okay.
Live on Facebook.
I'm going to admit everyone in from the waiting room here. And it's recording. All right.
It's recording. Ooh.
Hey, welcome everyone.
All right. Everyone made it.
Oh, someone's watching the news.
I'll mute everyone. And then, yep.
Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Hello.
Can you see me?
Lisa, I'm going to mute all, and then I need you to unmute yourself. Okay.
Am I okay? I'm just kidding.
Yay. It's funny because it does say mute all participants on entry, but that didn't happen.
Not the way.
Not the way. Yay.
All right. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Emily and I are super excited for this session. I think it's going to be, well, I know it's going to be compelling and engaging, and I am personally looking forward to learning a lot. For those of you that don't know, my name is Seth Young. I'm the director of the Augusta Heritage Center. This session, Wet Plate Photography, Resurgence and History and Resurgence in the 21st Century, presented by, almost got it right. I got some notes.
I talk about a little bit of that, but
yeah. Is brought to you by the West Virginia Department of Arts, Culture, and History, the National Endowment for the Arts, and we must give a special tip of the hat to the West Virginia Humanities Council that graciously sponsors this and many other events and makes them free and open to the public. We will be posting a link to a survey in the chat in both Facebook and here in Zoom. And it would do us a great service if you would fill out that survey. That helps us get more funding and will help us bring you more online events like this one when we have to, and in-person events once we can make that transition. I'd also like to thank the many hundreds and hundreds of donors that have given to the Augusta Heritage Center over the past several months. Your support has really propelled us into the future. There's a lot of exciting expansion happening up here at the Augusta Heritage Center. The most notable is we are beginning to digitize the vast Augusta archives. That project will take many years, but it is being started now. We have an AmeriCorps on staff whose full-time position is to digitize those archives, and we're going to make them free for the public on our new website. I'm also happy to announce that we've been able to hire a full-time technical director that'll help us facilitate that, as well as keep the website up and running and allow us to have vibrant programming online until we make that transition into in-person programming. So from the bottom of our hearts, thank you for your support. I would like to now introduce the esteemed artistic director of the Augusta Heritage Center, Miss Emily Miller.
Hi, everyone. So glad to see all of you on Zoom and also the people signing in and watching on Facebook. I wanted to say for those of you on Facebook, as well as Zoom, of course, when you comment, we will convey those to Lisa, so you can interact and ask questions on Facebook. I will already convey. Kelly Alba says, "Oh my gosh, hi Lisa." So there that's for you, Lisa. And there are people already commenting and watching. So we will convey your comments to Lisa, and any questions you have, we will convey those. So I am so excited to present to you Lisa Elmaleh, who has taught at Augusta many times and is a wonderful teacher. People are commenting and I've allowed participants to unmute themselves because I want you to be able to potentially maybe ask questions later, but do try to keep yourself on mute if possible. Okay, so Lisa Elmaleh is a wonderful teacher and also a wonderful artist. She is from Miami, Florida originally, but now makes her home in Paw Paw, West Virginia in the Eastern Panhandle, which is a wonderful cultural center. I feel like Elkins is a cultural center too. There's a lot of those in West Virginia. And we're just so happy to have Lisa and her work here. And you'll hear she's going to present a lot of her life's work in this presentation. So I won't go into it too much, but it's very, I always get very excited. I've actually picked up a magazine on a newsstand and seen Lisa's work, which is very exciting to me. So without further ado, we're gonna have Lisa Elmaleh, and I need to share my screen for you.
Oh yeah, because my internet is slow. I see Marcia flapping. So it's me, Emily, Seth, Marcia, and then my mom has a black screen. That's who's on my top row right now.
Okay, so without further ado, here it is. And if just for those of you watching at home, sorry, one more thing. If you just want to see Lisa and you are on Zoom, you can press speaker view and you'll see Lisa because she'll be the one talking. But if you are watching from Facebook, you will just see her anyway because I'm going to go on to speaker. Take it away.
All right. So hello, everyone out there, whoever's listening and whoever maybe has this on in the background and is doing dishes or however you are enjoying this hour. I'm so very glad to be here with the Augusta Heritage Group Festival Foundation, etc. I think the first time I showed up at Augusta, I went there to try and make tintype photographs of some musicians that I knew were teaching there. And so it's kind of funny, like I kind of just like snuck in the back door, I felt like, and now I've been teaching with you guys for a little while. Unfortunately not this year, but maybe sometime in the future if this ever ends. Maybe I shouldn't have started out that way. So I guess let's go to this is my name, Lisa Elmaleh, and that's me, and my camera, that's Fitzgerald Fitzwilliam Fitzgeorge, my 8x10 camera. You can go to the next slide, Emily. I can click it, but it won't actually do anything for me. When I started college pursuing a photography degree, I spent most of my waking hours in the darkroom, which Marcia can attest to, were not always fruitful hours, but they were always worthwhile. I fell in love with large format photography and I started using an 8x10 camera. And this is my camera, the front of it. You can go to the next slide. Digital photography was starting to take off, but I wanted to go backwards. I pursued antiquated printing processes from the 1800s. Next slide. Boop! Processes I could use my 8x10 negatives with, such as the salted paper printing process and the Calitype process, which are both hand-coded printing processes that require UV light to make the exposures. Next slide. So when I graduated from the School of Visual Arts in 2007, I wrote for and received the Tierney Fellowship to learn wet plate collodion photography, a handmade photographic process that uses raw chemistry in an on-site darkroom. So I built a darkroom in the trunk of my car. You can go to the next slide. And I set out for the back roads of America, looking to be lost in the American landscape. Next slide. Like the original USGS landscape photographers who utilized this process, such as my wet plate boyfriend, William Henry Jackson, depicted here. But as a woman alone and with the added bonus of the internal combustion engine, I was looking to be lost in the American landscape because, as Henry David Thoreau once said, next slide, it is a surprising and memorable as well as valuable experience to be lost in the woods anytime, not till we are completely lost or turned round, for man needs only to be turned round once with his eyes shut in this world to be lost. Do we appreciate the vastness and strangeness of nature? Next slide. So I started traveling around on back roads, you can kind of roll through this, like, kind of slowly here. I started traveling around on back roads. Oh, good, I'm getting a phone call. Sorry. I started traveling around on back roads and using this process, making glass negatives. I was still learning the process, so all kinds of horrifying and delightful mistakes happened on this journey. You can troubleshoot any of these photographs, but this one in particular was a real catastrophe where I left the glass plates on the roof of my car after I had been shooting for like 2 hours and drove off with them on the roof of my car. I love that I could see Emily laughing.
That's just so beautiful. I know of so many stories like this in fiddle repair, in all walks of life.
But in fiddle repair, you can't just put it back together and make it into a print. Like if you, like, I've run over a fiddle before, which was not a good day, I gotta say. It's really hard to bring it back.
That's true. Thank you, Bob Smacula.
Yeah, big up to Bob Smacula, wherever you are right now. You can go to the next slide. So the wet plate collodion process is this process where you take a substrate, which can either be glass or tin, or, people have used various other things as well. But in this case, I was using glass. You pour this substance called collodion on the plate, which is kind of like a gluey, kind of syrupy, kind of liquid stuff. And then you drop that plate with the gluey, liquidy, syrupy stuff into the silver nitrate, which sensitizes it. And then the plate is removed from the silver nitrate, put into a plate holder. The plate holder is put into the back of the camera, and then the exposure is made and then has to be developed all while the plate is wet. That's why it's called the wet plate process. I mean, I don't know if that's exactly why it's called the wet plate process, but that could be one of the reasons. So this body of work led me to the first time that I was ever published. And it was in Harper's Magazine in the reading section. I have no idea how they saw my work. But I was contacted by Harper's Magazine, and they wanted specifically this picture, which started a pretty long-standing relationship with Harper's Magazine. They've been really supportive of my work throughout all of this. Next slide. Everglades. Oh no, there's a fly in here. So I grew up in South Florida. I grew up in Miami, which of course is the city. But the Everglades, when I went back to South Florida to start photographing there, the Everglades felt so much like home because it was the landscape that I grew up in that I really connected to. My mom raised me as a single mother, and I have this really, it just brought me back to being a kid and living in this landscape. So in the 1800s, when the wet plate collodion process was a leading method for creating photographs, the Everglades was a river of grass flowing south from Lake Okeechobee. And this is what it looked like back in the 1800s. You can go to the next slide. And at that time, the giant coastal wetland was, so they wanted to for urban and agricultural use. So what happened was, see this red portion here, that is what is left of the Everglades today. Drainage canals were dug to drain the water for this development. So the Everglades are now a small fraction of what they were. You can go to the next slide. This is another way of seeing that. So this is pre-1900. Next slide. And this is 1992, 93. I don't even know what it looks like now, because I only found these maps, but I can imagine it's worse. So fresh water has to be pumped in from the cities, Tampa and Miami, to keep the Everglades alive. I think you can go to the next slide now. And you can just kind of roll through these. So a large portion of our migratory birds go to the Everglades to feed on their migratory pattern. I want to say I've read it, and I should have it in my notes, but I think it's something like 70% of our North American migratory birds go there to feed. This is, oh wait, this picture, let me tell you about this picture. So I was driving through the Everglades, right? And I get to the end of the road, you know, and I turn around and the light's kind of dying and it's pretty dark. And I'm just like, oh, I don't know if I can find another picture right now in this light. And I'm driving and all of a sudden I see in the mangroves way back in the shadows, there's like 50 egrets and they're all just back in there feeding. And I go, oh man, I would sure love to get a picture of that, but it's probably not going to happen. So I set up my dark room, which takes like, you know, 20, 30 minutes, and like scare half of them off. I pull my camera out, scare, you know, a few more off. And I'm like, okay, you know, I set up my camera, you know, there's about 5 or 6 left. I walk away from my camera to go coat a plate. I coat a plate, drop it in the silver bath, pull it out, come out from the dark cloth, and I turn around to where my camera is, and there is this ginormous alligator underneath my camera. And I'm just like, oh boy, guess I've got to wait. So, you know, now at this point, there's like 3 egrets left, you know, and then there's 2, and I'm like, you know, I just coated this plate for nothing. And eventually the alligator decides to get up and leave, slowly, of course. And I just step carefully over to the camera. I put the plate in the back of the camera and I made this exposure, which was like a 2-minute long exposure. And somehow that egret stayed still that whole time. But then, you know, I thought like maybe I should have just bought a stuffed one and like stuck it in there, but
that is an incredible story. I did not expect an alligator in that story.
So the Everglades is also the only place in the world where alligators and crocodiles coexist. So if you learn nothing else from this lecture, that is worth everything if they ever ask that question on Jeopardy. Next slide. So, you know, South Florida is hot, it's buggy, it's overbuilt, it's overcrowded. And I didn't have a particular affinity for Florida or for going back. But that's exactly why I did. The process itself, you can keep rolling through these. It gives clues that, visual clues that there's something not quite right here. And I worked on this project for 8 years, making these glass negatives, coming back and printing them in the darkroom, editing them and re-editing them, and eventually they were made into a book, which was published by Zatara Press. And if you would like to purchase that book, it is available on my shop on my website. And I'll sign it for you if you want that. I can even draw you an alligator. Oh, so 2 slides back, there was kind of this burnt palm. So the Everglades is one of those landscapes that, Smokey the bear did a lot of damage to, because it needs fire to exist. A lot of the plant life there requires fire to continue propagating new plants. So this was right after they do controlled burns now, and this was right after a controlled burn had happened in this area. And it's amazing over the course of I shot, this was like the first picture that I shot when I got to the Everglades. And over the next 8 years, I would go back to this spot and it just greened up and it was so lush by the end of it. And it's totally different, but I could always find where that tree was. You can keep rolling through the slides now. So this body of work, again, was published by Harper's Magazine. You can, I think, what's the next slide? I can't even remember. Oh, so Harper's Magazine is one of those really great magazines that actually pays their artists. And so with the money that I got from the publication of that portfolio, I was able to go out and purchase my pickup truck, which is depicted here in real life scale. That's generally, I stand about a foot underneath my tires. I love that I can see Emily laughing. Seth is hitting the laughter button. You can go to the next slide. Oh yeah, so this is my truck darkroom in full effect. This is it set up with all of my Brints trays underneath, and of course some cows hanging out next to it, because I like to encourage cows to hang out with me while I'm working in the darkroom. It kind of like adds a little sense of danger in there. Next slide. And that's me working in it. So when I'm working on the side of the road, one of the funny phenomenons that happens is people think that you can't hear them because you're under a dark cloth, because they can't see your face. So people will say some pretty wackadoo stuff while you're standing right next to them. You go to the next slide. And here's the book. My friend Sarah Brown of Questionable Press, she did the cover of this. She made a wood block cut of one of the photographs, and it's just, I can't even believe how good of a job she did. It's just so amazing. She does really good work. You should look her up and support her work. You can go to the next slide. So this is another body of work that I worked on kind of while I was working on that Everglades body of work. So in 2012, while I was living in Brooklyn on Ocean Parkway, I struggled with severe depression, and you can just roll through these. Warning, there's nudity in these. So if you're sensitive to that kind of thing, look away, and I'll tell you when you can look again. So I used the camera as a kind of therapy at this time of my life. I was using my 8x10 camera and 8x10 film, and I was taking notes every day of, what day it was, what day in the project it was, like what number day it was, and then kind of a description of what the photograph was, so I could keep track of them as I got them developed, so that I didn't get kind of confused. You can go to the next slide. So I took the camera with me everywhere, which wasn't always the easiest thing. You can keep rolling. This was my front window. I took it everywhere, and documented myself each day. It was actually ended up being over a year. And some are blatant and some are really naked, and some are I'm hidden or not totally present in the frame. And it was an assignment that I gave myself, that I had to do for myself every day. And sometime in, towards the end of it, I started finding my way out of that depression. But I had not really done a project like this before. And to have a document of this time in my life is like, I can still remember each thing. Like I can remember things that happened that day just by looking at the picture. Which sometimes I keep journal entries, but I never can remember what happened that day. But looking, I guess because I'm a visual learner, I can remember. So these are all shot on film. I don't know if you notice the difference here. There's not that kind of like blobulous edge thing going on, as with the wet plate stuff. You can keep going. Oh man, this was a night where I almost got into a car wreck. Sorry, Mom. I slid on some ice on the highway heading back to Nashville, and that was after we got back. We were both like pretty thankful. This was in New Orleans when I was shooting a story also for Harper's, written by Rebecca Solnit. That apartment had really good light, but man, it was fucking loud. So this project is how I ended up in West Virginia and how I met Emily, and how I ended up at Augusta. So when I first got out of school, I worked for these guys called the Starn Twins, as their professional carbon printer, which is another process from the 1800s that, well, it's really difficult. Anyone who's done it can attest to that. So while I worked in the darkroom, which was usually, like, depending on how much work I had to do, I was there, 8, sometimes 10 hours a day. And I would work in the darkroom and I would listen. They had like archives of old time music. And I didn't really know old time music before then. You can roll through these, or no, you can go to the next slide. That's right. So one day at a wedding, I met this old time string band, that last picture, and it seemed auspicious. So I asked if I could photograph them on my way down to the Everglades, not knowing or thinking that it would ever become a real full-fledged project. But each musician I met introduced me to people they learned from, or people that they play with, or friends of theirs that they thought would be really good at a tintype. And so this project kind of just started organically growing and evolving. You can go to the next slide. And so I would go to the homestead of each musician and I would photograph them, where they lived, and the landscape that they lived in. This is Ralph Roberts. He's a sweetheart. His wife, Charlie May, is really quite a firecracker. She made us chicken and dumplings that day, and they were the best I've ever had. This is Janice Birchfield, who, that's a wash tub bass, for those of you that don't know what that thingy is. And she plays the hell out of that thing. I mean, she is like Eddie Van Halen, RIP, of the wash tub bass. Next slide. And that's Bill Birchfield, her husband, her late husband. He played upside down and backwards. So you'll notice he's one of the few right-handed musicians that I have here, even though he was playing left-handed, because all of the tintypes that you're seeing here are direct positive and they're backwards. You can go to the next slide. So I met during this time, I met Sam and Joe Herman, who are here upside down and backwards, as seen through my ground glass on my camera. And Emily's going to play this video, but it's probably going to be a little laggy. You can go ahead and play it. So I met Sam and Joe Herman, and they have this cabin at the bottom of their property, which is a sheep farm. And they became dear friends of mine. And I went back and I photographed them the next year, and this cabin was empty. And I asked them, you know, what's going on with this place? And they said, oh, you know, nothing. And I said, could someone live there? And they said, yeah, you know anyone who wants to? And I said, me. So I moved here. You can see that room up top. See that window? See the peaked roof all the way up top? Yeah, that's this window. And I moved here in 2014. You can go to the next slide. It's kind of funny not having control of the slideshow because I can't remember what I put next in the slideshow. So now I live in this community that's rich with musicians. This is a place nearby to here called The Cabin, which I think there's some cabin people in here. Yeah, we obviously it hasn't been quite going off since COVID started, but generally the cabin happens, you know, once, maybe twice a month. People get together and play old time, and it's really sweet. And there's, you know, older folks and younger folks and kind of everyone in between. It's like going, like, it's my version of going to church. Like, this is like where I want to be and like feel the spirits. You can go to the next slide. That's Paul Rumsberg's hand. Next slide. This is the Portators. They're a West Virginia group. And this was at Clifftop. They were, we actually, so one night at Clifftop, which some of you may know what Clifftop is, and those of you who don't, it's this string band festival where everyone basically stays up for 7 days straight and doesn't go to sleep at all and just plays old time music all the time. And so one night before I get into the back of my truck to go to sleep, I'm having a discussion with these guys, the Portators, and they're like, you know, I don't know if it was me who suggested it or them who suggested it, but we were like, let's take a picture of you guys with like your instruments in front of your junk. And they were like, yeah, that sounds great. So we woke up real early and they stripped down to their little briefs and we did this picture. Next slide. That's Dennis Rhodes, and he's in Kentucky, Hawesville, Kentucky. Next slide. And that's his tobacco. He lives on a tobacco farm, which I'd never seen tobacco before this, and it's just the most amazing plant. They're so big. Next slide. This is Frances Green. I met her along the way in Georgia. She was friends with one of the fellas' moms from the first group that I photographed. Next slide. She was a singer. This is Jim Costa's porch, and that little white blur in the middle of the porch there is a cat. Because the wet plate process, for those of you who don't know, each exposure takes multiple seconds. So anything that moves becomes blurry. Next slide. And that's Jim Costa there. Next slide. And that's Grafton Wine. Next slide. This is Earl Thomas in Trapp, Kentucky. And I loved that plastic lawn chair, really made it for me. Next slide. Matthew McElroy. Next slide. So you people out there in West Virginia land probably know a lot of these people. This is Jennifer Smith. I want to say her last name is. I could be wrong, and I apologize if I'm wrong. I'm just going off of memory here. Next slide. You guys know this guy in Elkins. Next slide. Next slide. You can just kind of roll through these. A lot of, so that last slide was Frank George, and he had passed away. I guess that was last year. You can go to the next slide. It's Hannah Johnson, who's a nurse on the front lines dealing with ER patients in Aviva. And so I think this next slide is going to be a video, and it may or may not work, but while I was working on this project, making tintypes, I started shooting 16mm film of the musicians, because like the one thing that I wasn't capturing was the sound. So here's a little bit of that, if it works. It was lagging a little bit, but you guys get the idea.
I just want to mention here that Aviva, who you just saw, is an amazing artist in her own right, and she builds guitars and taught guitar building at Augusta last year. And was, I believe she was playing one of her own guitars there. It looks like her style.
I think that was maybe her first one. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and I've always wanted to buy an Aviva guitar like that. I'm like, so, you know, I've said to her, like, when I have my first like solo museum show, that is when I'm going to buy my Aviva guitar. But, you know, if I get money before then to buy an Aviva guitar, I'll do it. They're so beautiful. And she does different things to each one, and they sound so good too. So this project, this next project, I kind of changed the name of it to The Lightness in the Dark, but here called Sweet Home. So again, here I'm shooting film, and I moved to West Virginia in 2014. Again, here's my house, and I started journaling my home, which was a house with no running water. Not that that's a big deal or anything, but I had to learn how to live differently and sustain myself differently. And you can roll through these. So I started, learning how to garden. This was my neighbor Hopper, who maybe a year and a half after I moved here and became friends with Hopper, he shot himself up on the mountain behind my house, but he was such a gentle soul, and knew so much about the land. And so to learn anything from him was just valuable. And these were some of the things that he had grown, and just were extras that he was dropping off for me. He thought that potato looked like a heart. That's why he was holding it. You can go to the next one. So I kind of, let myself go wild a little bit. I had to learn how to cut firewood. I mean, I didn't have to learn how to cut firewood, but I did learn how to cut firewood. I listened to my elders. I learned how to grow a garden, which, every year is a little different. I learned how to use plants, and I started to learn what was edible in the woods and what was not. I also learned how to leave my doors unlocked, which was really new for me, having lived in cities my whole life. I watched death firsthand, and I learned how to hunt. I learned how closely death and life run together out here, which is different than how death and life runs together in the cities. And so this body of work is ongoing and a journal of my life in West Virginia. And this body of work kind of runs into my next body of work, which I don't know how many we have left here. Oh man, aloe. This aloe plant was the last survivor of my houseplants from Brooklyn. And as you can see, he didn't make it through the cold West Virginia winters. And this is the man who built my house. Well, Sam and Joe built onto it, but he built the original structure. Marvin Batson, I think was his name. Marvin Batson. His last name was Batson. I'm pretty sure his first name was Marvin. But I got to meet him, and I met him. It was not very long right before he passed. This is the wild tire fruit tree. It's in full bloom here. And this is where the sun rises from my front yard here. This was a very unfortunate horseradish root. This was a rib cage that I picked up on one of my walks when Sam and Joe were away. I was watching after their dog Jasper, and Jasper really loves all kinds of smelly things, but she found that rib cage and brought it over to me, and I kept it. But I had to photograph it first. This was one of Sam's sheep. Sam really loves her sheep. And they're really well cared for, and they grow old here. She uses them for wool. And this was, I mean, there's a lot of hard deaths, I think, when you have a farm, but this was a big one. I think this was Amelia. And this is Hopper's house after he committed suicide. Next slide. This was my neighbor George. He also passed away. I guess that was last year. But he had this motorcycle repair shop in front of my house, and that's his bike right there. Next slide. So that brings me to my next body of work, which kind of grew out of the other. This body of work started after the 2016 election. You can go to the first slide. So the country after the election felt viscerally different and divided more powerfully between urban and rural, liberal and conservative, working and middle class. So you can roll through these. So I delineated an area between the Eastern Continental Divide and the Western Great Divide, the part of the country referred to as the flyover states by coastal urbanites. The divide is both symbolic and political. Of the 29 states between those boundaries, 23 voted for Trump. I've continued this body of work through this year, and on into COVID. This photograph in particular was made in Detroit, Michigan, during a Black Lives Matter march on the Dekinder Cut, where I walked with my 8x10 camera. It was like a 5-mile march, like out and back. My friend Amber, she's from Detroit, and she helped me carry my film, thank God. But I had stopped on the side of the road to kind of like catch my breath and kind of put the camera down for a little bit and just kind of like stretch, and be like, it's okay, little shoulder, we're gonna make it back. And this mother and daughter came up to me and they were just like, what is that thing? That looks like an old camera. And I was like, yeah, it is. And so I let them kind of look through it, and I asked them if they would like to make a photograph, and they said yes. So we made this picture. You can go to the next slide. This is Crazy Horse out in South Dakota. It's actually bigger than Mount Rushmore. It was the Lakota response to Mount Rushmore. This was a vaquero in Texas, a cowboy who worked on this sheep ranch. Next slide. It's a predator. This was the Gonzales River after a flood. Next slide. Their names are not in my brain right now. I should have them in my notes, but this was a mother-daughter who had these white rabbits that they were selling, and they were just so beautiful with their rabbits. I just had to take a picture of them. Next slide. This was a house that was, it had been foreclosed on. I met this guy in California who he basically had built this house, and he had to foreclose upon it. So that became a thing that I photographed too. Next slide. As I traveled, I saw a lot of empty stores. I'm seeing more now than I've ever seen. Next slide. This is a wall around a once segregated school, Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. You may know of the Little Rock Nine. Next slide. Next slide. Environmental pollution. This is a organic waste dumping site. Organic waste, animal parts and things. It's pretty rough in Missouri. This is a bobcat caught in a snare. Next slide. The work and use of this camera is not about quick judgment. Rather, it's about slow perceptions and spending time in a place and getting to know its people. And what I've found is encouraging because I see a lot of strength and humanity in this country. I'm using the camera to bear witness to the people and places that I find here. You can keep going. Oh, this was wild. Shoe tree. There's actually a prosthetic leg back there hanging from the tree. Next slide. This was at a rainbow gathering post-COVID. His name was Amos. Next slide. Fireworks stand. Next slide. Oh, this was Michelle. I met her at a Cracker Barrel. I stopped there. It was in Kentucky, and I was on my way west. And she's a mother, and she like, I find a lot of mothers on the road, like, you know, that just kind of like want to take care of you. So, you know, Michelle, she like set me up with like extra coffee and like, you know, sent me out the door with like some snacks, and we made this picture on her break. Next slide. So the next two projects were recent assignments that were really dear to me. They were my two most recent assignments. So this first one is The Last Frontier, which was a story written by Ted Conover about the inhabitants of the San Luis Valley, which is outside of Alamosa, Colorado. When Harper's first called me up, they wanted me to shoot tintypes, but I looked at the weather when they wanted me to go out there, and it was negative 32 degrees. And so I said, I don't think tintypes are going to work. My shutter wouldn't have even operated in that kind of weather. So we discussed the project some more, and we decided to wait a little while. I think I shot it in June, and I arrived in a blizzard. I got there, it was, they were calling for 10 inches of snow, and like one had already fallen. I went and picked up my rental Jeep with 4-wheel drive, jumped in it, got on the highway, immediately had a tire blowout. It was like, and I had to get this story done, and I think I had like 3 days or something. But these people who live out in this climate are just major badasses. So when I got out there, every day the winds would pick up kind of at the end of the day, but on this one particular day, with the Grubers, I think we haven't gotten there yet, the one with the family. So there were 80-mile-per-hour winds, which I think is how this boat got to the middle of the desert. So this was a video that was of a sign blowing in those 80-mile-per-hour winds. I don't know if it videofied or not. No, it's okay. The sign was doing this. So I get to the Gruber's house in those 80-mile-per-hour winds, and we kind of ducked into the one place where we could go that wasn't windy, which was their barn. And we made this picture, which was, I felt it in my gut when I took this picture, like that it was special. They were a really special family. They are a really special family. And this was the first time I ever had the front cover of a magazine. That's Stacy, the mom in that picture, that last picture. Another badass mom. Yay to moms. Next slide. And this one was the most recent commission I did for the musician Tyler Childers. You can go to the next slide. So, you know, tintypes are backwards. So they call me up and they go, you know, Tyler's manager calls me up and he's like, hey, you know, we really want to do this tintype, and Tyler really wants to have his name and the title of the album in the photograph, like, so that there's no, you know, writing like typewritten fonts on the actual, like it's actually incorporated into the photograph. And I said, that's cool, but hang on, because wet plates are backwards, or tintypes are backwards. And so if you want to have a written sign in the picture, we have to make sure that it's backwards. And so they brilliantly made this sign backwards. And so, yeah, it's right reading in the picture. Next slide. This was, they wanted one shot, kind of long shot, one shot close up. And they also wanted a few pictures of Tyler and his wife, Sonora May, who's also a really badass musician. And this is her. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. This, so I think, is this the last slide? Yeah, no. But this exposure, this was a really significant place to Tyler and Sonora. And she, so Sonora had built this like spring-fed pump down in this kind of wet kind of area here, that was feeding water up to their house. So she's like a real badass too. Like in general, not just a badass musician, but like a badass person all around. And so, you know, this spot was really significant to them, because this is where they used to like bathe in the creek. And they wanted, you know, I wanted to take a photograph of them there, and they wanted to do the picture as well. So we actually made 3 versions of this picture, and it was really dark. And it was the end of the day. And this photograph was a 9-minute long exposure. So Sonora is leaning against the tree and Tyler is leaning against her. And they're both rock solid. This was like quite a moment for all of us. Next slide. Oh, that's it. Emily, I think you're muted.
I'm unmuting myself. Yay! Sorry, there was a lot of things I was doing just then. That was amazing. And a 9-minute exposure. I've never heard of such a thing.
It was serious business.
Wow.
Ooh. We do have, it was one of those times where you were so thorough, Lisa, that we didn't catch a lot of questions in the chat here or on Facebook. But we do have one by your protege, Kelly Alba, who is curious, why didn't you shoot the one with the backwards banner on glass for right way roundness? Was it because of cyanide thick, i.e. too dicey to combine breakable plus poisonous? I have no idea what that means. Perhaps you do.
So for fixer in wet plate, this is what Kelly's referring to. So cyanide is the fixer that I use when I'm making tintypes. But cyanide, if you get it in your bloodstream, it removes all the oxygen in your blood and you basically suffocate internally. So it's really dangerous to use cyanide in glass. That's what Kelly's referring to. But so Tyler and Sonora and, their team, they specifically requested tintype. That's why. And I think it was because they knew that American folk body of work and wanted to have something kind of in that vein.
Everybody seems very drawn to the photos that have a story attached to them. And likewise, the most seems like, I don't want to get too cliche, but the picture is worth 1,000 words, but you do an amazing job of capturing a story in somebody's face or just by an image. What do you look for when is it just something that comes like a flash, like a lightning bolt? Is there anything that you keep your eye on when you're traveling around as far as what you believe would make it translate to a great image in tintype?
Well, in tintype, usually I'm chasing after a particular person, trying to capture their likeness in the place where they live. But for like between the divides work, for instance, when I'm working on a project like that, I rely a lot on serendipity, and I kind of wait for those lightning bolt moments. And I find that usually there are signs along the way that tell me that I'm going in the right direction. Like that lady with the large handgun on her hip, for instance, I was traveling across Texas with Sarah Brown from Questionable Press, and she and I had stopped at a bar to get some food and like a beer, and this lady and her son started talking to us, and she offered for us to stay on her front porch for the night because it was a safe place to stay. Like those are the kinds of things that you can't plan, and you kind of just have to leave yourself open to. The people who kind of come into your path. And like I didn't plan on being in Detroit for the Black Lives Matter march. It just kind of happened that I fell there when it did. So I try to keep my ear to the ground and follow the sound, but yeah, it's hard to say exactly what pulls me where and why and when.
John is asking a more logistical question. He wants to know if you cut your own glass or if you're using a supplier that supplies the glass.
I do not cut my own glass because every time I cut my own glass in workshops, but like the amount of glass that I require for a shoot is so massive that like it's just not worth it because I just make too many mistakes. So like, if I was going to, I don't know, if I had to go to Elkins tomorrow and photograph, students on campus, let's say, in glass negative, I would probably want to bring with me at least 50 sheets of glass so that I have them on deck, just in case. And cutting 50 sheets of 8x10 glass is just like, the process is enough work. If I can cut the extra stuff out, I will. So.
Right. There are a few comments that have come up that I just want to relay. One is also Kelly Alba, an incredible viewer of humankind and all things. She says that aloe is having big 2020 feels. Very
Poster plant for the year 2020.
That is the plant. Yeah. Okay. You're also getting lots of comments along the lines of just beautiful, beautiful work. Jamie Townsend said, I love the deep, dark forest pictures. What used to be terrifying is now beautiful art, which I love. And also, there was a lot of people saying it was fascinating and beautiful. And also, Kathy, longtime Augusta attendee, says, I'm glad you're using your magical powers for good. Great presentation. So lots of wonderful people just connecting all over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lisa, this is a question for me. You know, when I look at landscape portrait paintings, the one that I'm personally usually drawn to are not like the typical pastoral beauty portraits, but usually the ones that have like a little bit of foreboding coming in them, like there's some danger happening, like a storm rolling in or something like that. When you're, it's interesting that you do so well with both human subjects and landscape matter. Typically, you know, a lot of the photographers that I'm personally familiar with have their druthers one way or the other. In your landscape photography, is there anything that sticks out to you as that would translate well to a tintype? Is it geometric shapes? Is it, because I'm not sure how you use color in this instance. What do you look for when you're looking for landscape matter? Because your photos do have that quality. They have some sort of longing to them. I'm not sure exactly how to put it, but they do evoke powerful feelings.
I'm glad that they do that. And you know, it's hard to say exactly what I'm looking for, because it's more of a gut feeling. It's just something, you know, when I see the landscape. I just feel like this little voice inside me says, take out the camera now, do it. But yeah, I've been told a lot of things about my pictures, like, you know, your pictures are morose, or you know, they have like a sad quality or a longing quality, or and you know, I don't know if I really aim for that. I think that's what's wonderful about that is that means that people are reacting to the work and kind of understanding it in their own light. And I think that's pretty wonderful. So it becomes more of a conversation.
Eric on Facebook mentions that kudzu seems to translate well into tintype. And I would have to agree. It does look very layered and lush.
Yeah. And so Tyler Childers' album, Long Violent History, that album, if you don't know it, you should definitely look it up. But it has a lot to do with, you know, what all has happened racially over the course of our long violent history. And I thought that the kudzu was kind of a nice metaphor for that, because it just kind of covers everything up and removes visibility of what's underneath. And that felt like a metaphor that worked for that. But yes, kudzu is really good in wet plate. It like definitely responds well to the chemistry.
That's profound. Well, thank you for that. Well,
I was just saying there's one more commenter who says, who I think has been commenting several times that how awesome you are. Euphis Ruth, who says,
oh my God, Euphis.
Collodion,
Hey, Euphis.
Collodion has become such a trend nowadays, but no one portrays the soulfulness of individuals and certain landscapes with Collodion like Lisa, which I think kind of sums up, I think, what everybody watching this presentation is thinking, like, whoa, this woman and her inner eye just brought out onto the page.
Yeah. Can I also say that Euphis, so I mean, like there's a lot of my angels here in the room in particular, but Euphis, behind me is the dry mount press that Euphis gave me. It's a big 20 by 24 dry mount press. And yeah, it's in this room right now with me. I used it today.
Well, thank you so much.
Incredible photographer as well, and you should look his work up because he is also doing wet plate. Major badass.
Right on.
Cool. Oh my goodness, I feel like my whole eye has changed over the course of this hour with you, Lisa. So wonderful. And I've gotten to see your work many times before, but it's just so beautiful to be led through it with you. So I want to say a huge thank you from Augusta, and also just thank you to all of our participants for watching. There were a bunch of people watching on the Facebook feed, and there will be a lot of people coming and watching it over the coming days, which is exciting too. And thank you to all of you who joined on Zoom too. It's fun to see your faces. That's so. And just know, I'm going to hand it over to Seth before I say goodbye. But I just did want to say that we're having these every other Tuesday into December, and so we have except for Election Day. So we are. We'll be having, the next one is on it's called Big Band Jazz in Black West Virginia, looking at the history of jazz music in the coal fields. And that's with a professor from WVU who wrote a book of the same name, Chris Wilkinson, and that will be very interesting. And we have one of my colleagues here at D&E, Lori Go, a dance professor, who is doing a talk called Dance and Social Justice. And after that, we have a wonderful monk from Germany who was born and raised here in West Virginia, in Helvetia. He's going to talk about Helvetia history and connections, which is very, very cool. And then my father-in-law, Jerry Milnes, will be presenting on bell snickling and Shanghai and other West Virginia mumming traditions that are still happening here in West Virginia. So we have a lot of interesting things that you can tune into. And I hope that we see you at those, all of you folks still watching. Okay, I'm gonna just say one more huge thank you to Lisa before I turn it over to Seth, who I'm sure is gonna say the same thing. Thank you all, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for being here with us today, Lisa. Another interesting project that we have going on is we're currently in the process of putting everything that was recorded on the Augusta Heritage video and recording label. So this is all the documentaries and CDs that have been recorded on Augusta Heritage Center label will be hosted for free on our website and on YouTube. And we're going to start rolling out that material a little bit later this month, well, actually early next month with on November 1st with Signs, Cures, and Witchery, a documentary made by the aforementioned Jerry Milnes, who had a big hand here at Augusta for many years and is still having a big hand here at Augusta. We'll be putting his work up. We'll be putting his work up for free, and we'll be hosting watch parties so that we can all feel like we're watching together, because even as we have to be physically distant, it's important that we're socially close. Lisa, thank you so much for being here today. This has been just absolutely profound and just absolutely incredible. We could not have asked for any more deep insight into the world of tintype photography than we got today. I've learned so much. I've enjoyed having you here. I really hope that we can work out sometime having you here join us on campus in person, because your energy and insights are just so welcome. We would like to thank our sponsors for helping us provide these events to the public free of charge. And that would be the West Virginia Department of Arts, Culture, and History, the National Endowment for the Arts, Davis and Elkins College, and we need to give a special nod to the West Virginia Humanities Council that directly sponsored this event right here. If you're on Zoom, there's a survey link in the chat. It would help us out if you filled that out. The more people we get to fill those out, the stronger case we make for why the Humanities Council should give us money to continue doing these types of things. If you're joining us on Facebook, I put the link to that in the comments a couple times. And then we must thank you, our sponsors. We've had hundreds of individuals donate to us over the last couple months, and it's just been absolutely heartwarming. And I want you to know that you're not helping Augusta survive, you're helping Augusta thrive during this crisis. We have so many projects going on with our archive and with providing free access to the body of knowledge within, and also releasing the recorded materials on the Augusta label to everybody. And trust me, Emily and I just met today. We are planning a vibrant summer 2021. Stay tuned for big news coming there, because if it's safe to do so, we're going to have the biggest party we can, because we want to see all you guys in person. We'll continue to do it digitally while we must, but we are dedicated to bringing you in-person programming as soon as we can. So with that said, I want to thank everybody for joining us this evening. Lisa, thank you so very much. This has just been a wonderful presentation. And we'll see you guys around the bend and in the near future.
Thank you guys so much. Goodbye.
Should we unmute everybody real quick so everybody can say goodbye?
Yeah, everyone press unmute.
Confidence, goodbye, yeah.
Bye.
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 Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yay. Oh, everyone turning on their cameras. Love it. So good to see everybody.
Yes.
So good to
My grandmother's name is Augusta.
Oh, you get special privileges.
Yes. Yes, Marcia. Okay, I'm going to end the meeting, but we're so happy to see you all and see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.